I am really, really privileged to be here, and it reminds me of a number of things, that there are 3 billion people on the planet in the workforce. And of that, 61% of them are hiding a part of their identity. And there are 2 reasons the studies have shown why that is the case. One, it is the inability to trust people, trust their organizations, but also a fear of rejection. And so it begs the question, to disclose or not to disclose? And that is the heart of our conversation today. And where I want to start is with both of you, starting with you, Candee, sharing your personal reason for being such committed individuals when it comes to disability.
Well, actually in about a week and a half, it will be 34 years that I've had type 1 diabetes. And when I was in the workforce at that time, but that was really before self-identification was even a thing. And then I went to work for a public utility, so I heard the comment in the back about working for a public utility. And we didn't do self-identification yet then either. But everybody knew, because with diabetes, they drill into you, you have to let people know, because if something happens, you know, it's something that they need to know how to respond, right, Shannon? One of my colleagues. But I did leave the public utility and I went to a company called Cardinal Health. And that's when the 2014 regs were, you know, looming. And I knew that I had to walk the talk because I was going to be in charge of all affirmative action processes. And I have to tell you, it was very difficult for me. And I've always been open about having diabetes, but I had a really hard time self-identifying as a person with a disability. And I think I told you last night, I'm one of those people that doesn't like the word disability. It's a personal choice. I know there are people who prefer Hispanic over Latino, some who prefer African American over Black, whatever, it's a personal choice. I feel like I live with a condition. And I know there are some people with disabilities that love the term disability, but some people don't like the term minority because, you know, it's a personal choice. And I had a really hard time. And a friend of mine said, you need to write a white paper about that. And I've not done that, but then I had a serious car accident 8 weeks ago and was in a wheelchair for 6 weeks. And I even sent a note to Carol Glazer and I said, you know, having a more visible, and it was a temporary thing, and so is this, but people don't know that when they see you in a wheelchair. And it gave me a totally different perspective. And I've had doors slammed in my face. I've had people try to wheel me in the wheelchair, and I was like, no, don't do that. People don't know. And I think the difficulty is, and to answer your question, I never really worried about the lack of acceptance, but I think for a lot of people, it's just a personal thing. They don't want to share and have the whole world know, maybe feel sorry for them, because I'm a person that doesn't ask for help, and I can do it myself. I'm the little red hen, and I think there's a lot of people that just don't need to be, you know, looked at as being different, and I think that's a shame.
Well, to begin, is this working?
Yeah.
I know mine goes in and out a little.
So to begin, I would of course say that we support self-identification in all aspects. We want people to be able to bring their whole selves to work and be who they are, and be able to enjoy being at work and not feel that that's another area where they have to hide a part of themselves. I mean, that's really the essence of what diversity and inclusion is. Now, I'm a pragmatist. I recognize that that's a very difficult choice for someone to make on an individual basis, though, if they feel they're going to be discriminated against because of the decision they make, whether to self-disclose or not. First, I'll talk a little bit about myself. My daughter has very profound autism and intellectual disability. So, and even though it may not be apparent from a picture, it's apparent within maybe 5 seconds of meeting her. So that's never really been a choice. I mean, I always disclose, and I've said that I seek accommodations for her on almost a daily basis, and it's true. I mean, people say, well, how do you seek accommodations on an almost daily basis? When you're pushing a child with profound autism in a running wheelchair around town and having to go into restaurants or movies or anything. You're always having to get accommodations. And people, and you know, my daughter also doesn't necessarily follow the conventions of what you do in a restaurant or in a movie theater. You know, sometimes she'll make noise when maybe others wouldn't. You know, sometimes she'll get very excited about something, even though it's not clear why. Maybe something internal or something that she's seen that others don't see. You know, she's extraordinarily neurodiverse, my daughter, and just such a wonderful person. I'm so lucky to be her dad. She's taught me a lot about the world. So I always disclose, though, about her anywhere I go, and often I have to fight to get certain accommodations, be it from the school district or frankly anywhere. I always have to push because they're not always used to having someone with such profound autism being there where they're not going to necessarily follow all their rules and where we have this huge running wheelchair that I'm pushing in there. So that's why it's on an almost daily basis. Now, there are many things that are not apparent, and it could be in the area of disability or it could be in other areas as well. My view is that I want people to be able to disclose. That's what we're working toward. So if it's disability, being able to disclose your disability and get any accommodations you need easily will help you be a more productive worker and will help you enjoy work more, to be able to bring your whole self to work. But if you feel you're going to be discriminated against, then it's probably not in your interest to do it. So I fully recognize that. We are trying to improve that situation by doing these Section 503 focus reviews, by trying to bring more of a focus on disability in all of our audits, by putting out best practices, by encouraging companies to have employee resource groups focused on disability, and centralized accommodation systems, and a culture that is accommodating and accepting of people with disabilities. In other areas, we want people to feel like they can self-identify however they wish. In the area of gender, many people will identify as male or female, but we also want people to feel comfortable identifying as non-binary, if they would like. Among the LGBTQ community, we want people to feel comfortable when they come to work, being able to share that with their colleagues and not be discriminated against. So, you know, that's another area where sometimes people don't self-identify because of overt discrimination that is done. And that's something that needs to be eradicated. So that's something the agency is interested in. Also self-identity based on race or ethnicity. I feel that there needs to be a discussion about that because many people are multi-ethnic or multiracial. And the agency needs to be looking at that issue as well. And there's this general conception out there that the agency is only focused on discrimination against women or minorities, but that's not true. We're focused on any discrimination that the statistics show is occurring. Many of our cases, it's not a majority, and it won't be because there's not historical discrimination against whites, but sometimes whites are included in the disfavored class, and we do that. There's no preconception. Wherever there's discrimination based on race, we'll seek to correct it. We still live in a world where it's typically the discrimination is against African Americans or Hispanics or Asians, but it sometimes goes the other way as well, and we will go there. Same with gender. There are certain jobs that are where there are stereotypes against men, and you will see discrimination against men, particularly in hiring in certain jobs, and we fix that. Most of our settlements are in favor of women, but some of them are not. So I think that's what the agency has to be relevant. So anyway, I guess the long and short of it is I want people to be able to self-identify as who they are. That's our goal as an agency, and that really is a nonpartisan, apolitical goal. That's what it should be. That's my view.
So as I listen to both of your stories, I'll characterize it this way. You have been advocating for your daughter.
Yes.
Since the time she was born. And you have been advocating for yourself. So how old is your daughter now?
She's 14.
What have you seen over the 14 years that you have been advocating for her? What have you seen or what have you experienced in terms of how you have had to advocate for her?
You know, it hasn't really gotten much easier. I mean, that's the IEP process with the schools, where you have to, you know, meet in a big group and advocate. I always have to push to get additional therapy, additional speech therapy, additional occupational therapy, additional ABA therapy. And they are wonderful professionals. My daughter goes to St. Coletta, which is a public charter school. They do a wonderful job. Nevertheless, I still have to push all the time because there's limited resources. And really not enough resources are provided for people with disabilities by the school system or generally. You know, in my personal capacity, tonight I'll be, and I was given permission to do this by the department, of course, but I'm on the Special Needs Advisory Board for DC now, so I'll be doing my first meeting tonight. So I'm looking forward to hoping, to improve that in my personal capacity. But, in terms of OFCCP, I think that the main focus of our agency is we want to be looking at whether companies are granting accommodations. If they're not granting accommodations, we want to look at every single denial or alternative accommodation in any focus review that we do, and eventually in any review that we do. It's my goal, to make sure it doesn't mean, you have the legal right to deny accommodations in very limited circumstances. But we want to make sure that those are very limited circumstances, and that typically accommodations are being granted. I met with many companies who tell me that generally they grant every accommodation request.
They don't keep track of it.
And so it's not an issue. When I used to be Coral Gables City Attorney, we elevated all those issues up to the city manager and city attorney level, and we typically granted them. So the main point, though, is you want people deciding whether an accommodation should be granted should be trained in how to do that, and there should be a centralized accommodation system tracking that. So that's why I think, I'm hoping it'll become easier through what we're doing. We're talking to the biggest companies in the United States, and I know that they all have diversity and inclusion and accommodation. Most of them have centralized accommodation systems. Almost all of them have diversity and inclusion departments. So I'm hoping this will change very quickly within a year or two. I mean, that's my goal.
Well, it sounds like the fact that you have naturally had to advocate for your daughter since the time she was born has helped you in the work that you are leading today. Am I right?
Yes, it has helped me a lot. And it's not just about, I try not to only talk about autism. I mean, that's the experience I've had, and I was very involved in the autism community in South Florida. But now, based on this job, it's a much bigger platform. I interact with disability organizations all the time. And it's been the primary focus, at least in my leadership of OFCCP, is to do more in the area of disability. And not just autism, every disability. Every disability. And both apparent and non-apparent.
One of the things I have learned, Candee, from talking to you, but also what I have learned from talking with a lot of leaders who are just disclosing their disability today, is that it's the same in terms of experience. There's fear. And one of the things that strikes me is that you're all individuals who are accomplished in your careers at the time when you choose to disclose. You're accomplished. You have a great brand that is established. You're influential, and yet it is challenging for you. So how did and how can organizations help employees to disclose their disability? And it's not that as hard of a struggle as you have had to go through.
To what's been said this morning already, I think a lot of it's your culture. And I think we were talking last night again, I love it. When I was in corporate America and the CEO would get up there and say, this is going to be our culture. Like, really? Without realizing that each individual department has its own culture. Each larger department, function has its own culture. Each location, each establishment. You might have, 25,000 employees across 49 states, which is what one of my companies had. And every single location and every department within had its own culture. So you can't just stand up and say, this is what it will be. You have to show by example and lead by example. And it's interesting, no matter what you think, a lot of times the person, the head of the organization doesn't recognize the importance of working on behalf of people with disabilities or whatever other protected class there might be, because maybe it's not personal to them until, and I'm going to say if it's a man, until his wife gets breast cancer or has a child with autism, or like Brad, you had a child with Down syndrome. Unless it happens to you, then it's not really that big of a deal. And I think we need to, I think we need to get past that, and I'm a firm believer of bringing your whole self to work. And I think that's incredibly important. If you're, LGBT, or if you're, my boss at American Electric Power was African American, and she wanted to wear locks, and this was way back before affirmative action. She was told she had to blow dry her hair and everything. So times change, and she wanted to bring her whole self to work. I'm a firm believer in that. But the thing is, I know Craig did a video for the OFCCP. We're in the process of developing one for me for DirectEmployers and Recruit Rooster. I think it's something that companies need to do. You know, I think about, we always worry about the candidate experience. How many of you have heard about, we got to improve our candidate experience? Probably everybody is going to raise their hand. But when you think about your candidate experience, who are you targeting? People who aren't in wheelchairs, right? Or people that don't have disabilities. Do you have videos that show your people with disabilities talking about what a wonderful organization they work for and how supportive they are when they need time off or they need an accommodation? Do you do that? If so, fabulous, but if not, why not? And I think that's something that we all need to get to the C-suite and let them know. At Cardinal Health, George Barrett was the CEO, wonderful man, and I had a low blood sugar reaction, and I was literally sitting about 6 rows back from where he was presenting. And I was sitting next to one of the vice presidents in HR, and the only reason this is important is because it was so colorful. I had a pink, hot pink, and black leather dress on. And it was literally hot pink and then black on the sides and hot pink from the back. And I'm about 6 rows back from him, and I dozed off. And I knew he had to have seen me because he kept looking right at me when I was still with it. And so the next morning, about 7:45, I went up to his office because he knew who I was and everything. And I walked up and I said to his admin, I said, hey, is George here yet? And she said, he should be here any minute. Well, then he walks around the corner. And I said, well, I just wanted to apologize to him. And she said, what for? And he walks around the corner and I said, hey, yeah, is my thing not working? Okay, oh, that hurt. Oh, thank you. I hate microphones, by the way. So anyway, I said, well, I need to apologize. I said, I wanted you to know during your town hall yesterday, I really was listening until my blood sugar got too low, and I just dozed off. And I said, I'm really apologize for that. The first words out of his mouth were, well, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? What do you need? What do you need? What can I do? I mean, he was like immediately alarmed, and I said, I'm fine. I'm fine. I just wanted to apologize because I didn't want you to think you put me to sleep. And he goes, well, I probably put lots of people to sleep. No worries there. But that's the type of leadership that you need. And somebody that his concern for my health was the most important thing. Not, did I look good? And, in my town hall, he didn't care. That's a true leader.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
You all can hear me still, right? So when I sent, you alluded to this email that I sent to the staff at OFCCP. I did. It's on our website if you'd like to see it. I did a presentation to OFCCP staff with the head of the Civil Rights Center at the Department of Labor, telling our staff that we welcome individuals with disabilities, we welcome their requests for accommodations, our goal is to grant them where we can, and that we are going to make sure that experts are involved in ensuring that those are granted when they should be, and typically that they should generally be granted. And it was a long discussion about the importance of people with disabilities in this video. I then sent an email to all staff, and I remember when I was doing the video and email, I was told that, if you do this and you send the email and the video, you're going to get a lot more people emailing you about their disabilities. And I go, that's part of the goal. I'm okay with that. If they want, they don't have to, but I would be honored actually if they wish to, to make sure. And I did. I actually got a lot of emails right after that, and I still do. They go all the way to the top. They go around like 5 levels, which causes some issues sometimes, but it doesn't matter. And I always refer to the appropriate person, but I make sure that it gets addressed, and I make sure to notify the appropriate people and have the Civil Rights Center involved. And I suggest that to any of your companies. Have your CEO or your Chief Diversity Officer or your Chief Accessibility Officer send an email. Really, it's best if it's from the CEO, though, in my opinion. Send it saying that just those things, even a few words like we welcome people with disabilities. We would love you to self-ID if you would like. You will be treated with great respect. Any accommodation you need will typically be granted. And please contact all these people if you'd like to be in this employee resource group or et cetera. And it works. It worked at OFCCP, and we enforced this stuff, but a lot of people were not disclosing. So it appears that this is a common issue, even at a government agency entrusted to enforce Section 503.
So let's get practical and real. What behaviors can you offer and what actions can you offer to the audience about how they can build trust, close the trust gap with the employees?
That's a tough one in any type of office, I think. And I'm going to, again, give kudos to Michelle and KPMG. And I asked her to come and speak at our annual meeting about the Day of Understanding that they did. I think it's one of those things that is so important. Get the information out there and talk about it every day. So the leadership, anytime you send a memo, is this on? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
okay.
yes, you're good.
Okay.
You're doing well, Candee.
I think it's incredibly important to keep reiterating that message and how important it is. Because, like I said, I'm a firm believer of bringing your whole self to work. It doesn't matter what you look like, what disability you might have, what color you are. You know, I think you need to recognize what perspective that individual brings to the office. If they're, you know, a person with a disability, if they're African American or Black, whatever your choice is, Hispanic or Latino, Asian. Everybody has a different perspective, but it's important to be able to gather their knowledge in any decision-making process. And so with disabilities, I think it's so much of a fear factor because I don't know what to do. Gosh, should I help with her wheelchair? You know, people don't know to ask. You know, do you need, I told the story, I had this brace with a pair of shorts. I was at the grocery store, and this little girl and her mother were walking in front of me, and the little girl looked at me and did a double take, and then she tugged on her mom's shoulder like, what's wrong with that lady? And I thought, you know, if that were me, if I were the mom, I would have used that as a teaching moment for a young child. You know, well, why don't you ask her, honey? You know, and have that conversation. You know, I mean, obviously not everybody's going to be open to answering the question, but that's a learning moment too, you know? So I think that there's a lot of opportunities. You know, don't be afraid to make a mistake. You know, I mean, we have to not be afraid in every other aspect of our business, but we need to keep reiterating that message that people with disabilities are important. They give us a much different perspective on things that we have no idea about, especially if we're a person without a disability. And that's what makes our company successful. You know, we don't think about, we talk about, you know, how a diverse workforce can add to the bottom line, and that is true. But we don't think about, I think someone in one of the questions talked about the cost of attrition. And we don't ever think about that, you know, but if you bring people with disabilities to the workforce, they're loyal. They don't miss any more days than your employees without disabilities. You know, they don't need special assistance in most instances to do their job effectively, and they stick around. And that's a positive impact on your bottom line.
So my thoughts are, I have some specific thoughts and a general one. Specifically, take a look at our website and go to the Office of Disability Employment Policy website and look at all the resources that both have. I think Jennifer Sheehy is here. I know she sent me an email. Talk to her. And they do great work. She's back there. They do great work. She's a real leader in this area. And so avail yourself of those resources. But look at our specific recommendations. They really, I think, work. They work. Centralized accommodation system, email from your CEO, coordinate with the vocational rehabilitation agencies in your area, do employee resource groups. Those really work. They build up from the inside a real group of stakeholders who care about disability and make it easier for people to self-identify. Do your self-ID campaigns and make them, you know, be sensitive that some people may not want to self-identify, but make sure that it's clear that when you do the campaign that anyone who does self-identify will be welcome and that that's viewed as a positive thing. Some of the companies that have the highest self-ID rates do those things. We have 8 recommendations directly on our website, so look at that. More generally, it's about building the right culture. If someone makes a joke that's insensitive or offensive or discriminatory, you need to immediately stop it, particularly as a leader. Whenever I'm in a conversation, it's very rare, but when it does and someone uses, for example, the R word for someone with a disability, I always immediately say, that's not acceptable. You can't say that word, you know, always. You have to do that. And then they never do it again. and they learn. They should know, but they learn. So at the very least, they learn that the director of this agency absolutely doesn't accept that. And so you have to build that sort of culture. Your leaders should not be doing those things or should be held accountable. But you build that sort of culture that people with disabilities are welcome, and it makes a big difference. I've seen it in my own agency within 2 years. And some of the best companies in this area, they do have that culture, and they have hiring programs for people with disabilities. I think that's a great way. If you have a hiring program for people with disabilities, I've seen some of the autism hiring programs and other neurodiverse hiring programs. And if you, that gives a great signal to people with disabilities that your company cares. Even if they don't decide not to use that hiring program, they know that you view that as something that's positive, that someone with a disability is someone you want to recruit and hire. And I would just conclude by saying, I don't know why more companies aren't doing it. Some of it must be prejudice and stereotypes because we're talking about a huge portion of the American population. 20% of the population has a disability. Almost everyone will have a disability at some time in their lives. The labor force participation rate is not anywhere close to where it should be. It's 20%. It should be much closer to the general one, which is 60 some odd percent. The unemployment rate is double. The wage gap still exists, and that's one other thing I wanted to mention. For your companies, I would ask that you empower your chief accessibility officers to not just look at hiring, but also look at compensation and promotions of people with disabilities, because that's important too. If you're not getting promoted or getting compensated correctly, you're probably going to leave at some point, and or you're going to be forced to stay, which is the worst thing, because of the problem with the market. It's a distorted market where it's difficult for an individual with disability to move from company to company, and yet you are clearly, and by you I'm talking about very generally, I'm not saying you specifically, but you are underutilizing them, and it's bad for the economy, obviously. So we need to do more in this area. That's why we're doing the focus group.
I think a lot of it too is education of your recruiting staff. I think ERGs, BRGs, affinity groups, whatever you call them, try not to segregate and have only people that belong to that group. For instance, at Cardinal Health, we had Disability Advocates Network. So we had people with disabilities as well as people who support people with disabilities. We had parents of children with disabilities. And it was really interesting. Again, everybody knew I had diabetes, but I had a recruiter call me one day and say, "Can I ask you a personal question?" And I said, "Sure." I'm pretty wide open about stuff like that. And she said, "Well, I have a candidate that's coming in for a pharmaceutical distribution operations center position." And she said, "We're not allowed, or they're not allowed to have anything attached to their person when they're at work." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Well, she told me she has an insulin pump." And I said, "Okay." And now I've had a TSA agent tell me I've had to take it off. And I was like, don't think so. And I said, I'm very serious about that. And her supervisor told her she needed to focus on other things. But anyway, I told her, I said, that's not considered something, attached to her person. And interestingly enough, she told the hiring manager about it, and he ended up hiring her, and she is doing a fabulous job still to this day. But you know what? She knew enough to ask the question. She knew to find out, is this going to be a problem? How do I answer this question? If she would share it with the hiring manager, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just a big fear, I think. And I think people are more open and accepting once they understand what they don't know.
And can I say one more thing? And also, don't be legalistic. I mean, obviously lawyers are going to be involved in this process sometimes. I understand. Lawyers are often very risk averse. I remember at every level, whenever I want to say something like in guidance or a speech, this was at every job I've been at, let's go beyond the requirements of law. The lawyers are always like, well, you just have to do the law, you don't have to go beyond the requirements. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm a policy person. I want to go beyond the requirements of law. That, one, guarantees that you meet the law. And two, why wouldn't you go beyond the requirements of law in this area? You should. You really don't need a lawyer if you're granting an accommodation. It's only if you're denying it. And you need to make sure that you're denying it. But if someone feels like they're going to have to go through a legalistic process that's not welcoming, anytime they request an accommodation, they probably won't. Many of them won't. One thing I've heard from companies is that legal often tells them that, we don't really recommend a disability hiring program because you're sort of favoring individuals with disabilities. First of all, I wish to live in the day when really people are favoring individuals with disabilities, because I think these disability hiring programs don't even the playing field, to be honest with you, but I think it makes it a little fairer. I think it makes it a little fairer, a little better. So, but they always say, well, are you favoring people with disabilities? Look, the other thing is, and this is clear, and we're publishing guidance on this, and ODEP has as well, and the EEOC, you're allowed to favor individuals with disabilities. That is one area where you're allowed to favor people in employment. That is perfectly fine. You can have a disability hiring program. There's nothing unlawful about that at all. And my view is when you have only 1 in 5 people with disabilities in the labor force, there's a lot of really talented people you're missing. So actually, these disability hiring programs are merit-based programs in my view, because you're going to be getting people that otherwise wouldn't enter the workforce, but now are very talented. If someone with autism is going to an interview and they have difficulty looking you in the eye, and they have social anxiety and so don't interview so well under traditional standards, you're not going to hire them, even if under traditional standards, if you don't understand that you don't need to be able to do that to do this job, you're going to miss out on a lot of really talented people. That's not pro-merit, that's anti-merit. That means you're missing meritorious people. That's why you need to have these programs. That's why it's a pro-merit program in my view. Yeah.
I have so many more questions for them, but we are out of time, and I want to give you the chance. That person who has a burning question, you get to ask the one question that we're going to allow. So her hand went up first. There we go. Microphone close by. Okay. No. Considering where we are, we need to really hear you.
Good point.
Hi, my name is Barbara Kornblau, and I'm here representing United Spinal Association's Pathways to Employment program. And what I want to get across, I happen to be an occupational therapist and an attorney. And I recommend highly getting occupational therapist consultants who can tell you the kind of accommodations that people need.
So do I. I'm working with one right now for my
Good,
wrist.
very good. Now, the other thing that we do at United Spinal Association is we tell people when they go into an interview to say, you know, I know you expect people to walk into this interview, look you in the eye, give you 3 firm pumps of a handshake. I can't do that, but let me tell you what I can do. I have 2 adult sons who are on the spectrum, and I've been working with them to say a similar kind of script. So I think it's important to understand that you're going to see people who don't look like what you're used to hiring, but they can do a darn good job, and they're very dedicated. And I'm sorry it wasn't a
Agreed.
question, but
No,
my passion, I had to get it out.
Glad we've got hers.
Yeah, that was enormously helpful because we got some tips from you. So we really appreciate that. Anyone who has a burning question? All right. Microphone coming.
So the one thing I thought was missing, and I just want to get your thoughts on that, is that I think until we get the environment to stop saying, I'm sorry, people are not going to self-identify as quickly. Unless you're passionate about your disability, you're not going to self-identify, because what normally happens is everybody has to feel like they have to say, I'm sorry, I can't do this, or I'm sorry, I can't do that, or justify why they're different. So until leadership says, you know what, you don't need to say I'm sorry. Like, you're bringing your whole self to work. I'm glad you are. Don't be sorry. So until that becomes part of the fabric and that messaging, self-identification is going to be really hard for those that say they're sorry time and time again, because they don't feel like they're not sorry, because they are truly sorry that they are different than everybody else. So until they don't have to be sorry, so how do you feel about that?
I actually heard something about a month or 2 ago. I should share it with you. And it was addressing that exact issue. Stop, everybody, doesn't even just focus on people with disabilities. Everybody needs to stop always leading with, I'm sorry I didn't do this, or I'm sorry I couldn't get to that, or I'm sorry I can't attend that. Instead, say, thank you for the invitation, I won't be able to attend, or thank you for pointing that out to me. That's a good opportunity for me to gather more information. So it's changing our entire focus, our entire approach, and I agree with you. Unfortunately, what I try to tell people at my office is that change doesn't happen overnight. And I think that if you compare where we are today to where we were 15 years ago, we've gone forward by leaps and bounds, but it's still a long, arduous process. I just wanted to add one thing to Craig's point earlier. Disabilities don't discriminate. So you can focus on hiring people with disabilities, and you're going to get every other protected class in the world. You're going to get race, color, religion, sex, national origin, gender identity, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter. You're going to get veterans. You're going to get every single class. And I think it's just a process we need to keep pushing forward.
I do think there is a fair amount of urgency to this, though, not just because it's the ADA is a right, Section 503 is a right, but also, even though maybe practically it won't happen overnight, it sort of needs to happen in the next few nights because this is the best economy we've had in years. We're at full employment. This is the time when companies should be looking into areas where people have been underutilized. The disability community is a huge community that has been underutilized by this economy throughout history. And so this is the best time to get companies to take another look. We're going to try to require that, obviously. I mean, we're a government regulatory agency, and encourage that to the extent we can't require it, encourage it. But really, all of you need to be encouraging that because there is a real merit-based argument for hiring people with disabilities. There are studies that show that companies that incorporate and integrate individuals with disabilities into all aspects of their employment do better, that it's a better working environment. They probably do better with inclusion generally. It's just a better approach. This is the time to do it. So I feel that there is urgency, and that's one reason why we're so focused on these focus reviews, Section 503 focus reviews, but also trying to incorporate Section 503 enforcement into everything we do at OFCCP, because federal contractors are often some of the biggest companies, biggest names in the United States. These are companies that help drive the American economy. They sign up, they volunteer. I mean, I know there's a huge economic benefit to it, but they volunteer to be federal contractors. They agree to it. So they accept these responsibilities, and that's where we should start. So, and that's why we're starting there. But I'm hoping that this will extend to the EOC and to all companies. It makes the perfect sense. The only thing that really could be stopping it is prejudice and stereotype. There's really nothing else. So we gotta push through those.
Ladies and gentlemen, you heard the word passion this morning. You just experienced passion from these two great panel members. Please give them a great big round of applause. Again, I had lots more questions for them, and we certainly could spend more time, but they're here, and so nab them while you can to ask the questions that you did not get to ask of them. As a reminder, please complete the survey on all of the sessions thus far. The three things I heard from listening to them, one is the importance of awareness and education in whatever form that works for you in your organization. And the second thing I thought was really important is communication. You can do all the great things that you do, but if you're not cascading throughout the organization, at all levels of the organization, what it is that you're doing, then it's going to be harder for people to understand who fits within their category of whatever that may be, so that they can reach out, so they can feel comfortable being there, so they can disclose. And then the third thing that's really important in all of what we talk about today is people. We talk about how busy we are, we're busy executing, we're busy meeting this, we're busy. We can't do any of that without people. It is people who do the work. It is people who make the customer experience sweet or sour. It is people who make the money. So in all things that we're doing, it is all about our people. With that in mind, you got a chance to break for lunch and to network and to connect. We're going to ask you to go outside. There's a buffet that's set up outside. Feel free to sit in the room, sit wherever they're seating and you're comfortable, and connect with each other, dialogue, share, learn, and I will be back to let you know when it's time to begin the next part of our program for the day. So enjoy.